There are so many different types of teapots and all sorts of teaware that you can get. And when you just get into drinking Gongfu tea, it can feel like you're diving in the deep end. But these things that we're gonna talk about in this video are the things I wish that someone would have told me about when I first started drinking tea. Number one by far is an electric kettle. This was one of the biggest things for culture shock moving back to the US, not having electric kettles and rice cookers, honestly, in every house or every restaurant. You can definitely brew with the stovetop kettle, but honestly, the fact that these heat up in 3 minutes and you can make tea however you want, for me is just, it's a no-brainer. It gets you to bring the tea, no matter how you wanna brew it, right away. It does not need to be one of those $100 plus electric kettles with variable temperatures to start off. In Japan, they even have the yuzamashi, which are very similar to a Chinese gongdao bei. And what you do is you pour into them and it actually brings the temperature down. So when you pour from the boiling water in the kettle to the gaiwan or pot, that's gonna cool it down. And then when you pour it into the decanting vessel, that will also cool it down. This is if you're looking to do like Japanese or other green teas that you want to be at lower temperatures. You can just pour it multiple times and that actually brings the temperature down a lot. I tested it, it's between 10 and 20 degrees Fahrenheit each time. So for a mild green tea, you probably have to do it like 4 or 5 times, but for something that you want a little bit hotter but not quite boiling, you could just decant once or even twice. And even to this day, I still use my basic black one with the cork top and cork handle just as much as I use my fancy Fellow ones or Bonavita or any of those other fancy ones. The second one is a scale, and honestly, I used to be really skeptical about the cheap ones, like that they weren't going to be accurate, and I even bought gram testing weights to put on top. They're surprisingly accurate, like brand to brand, any of these $5, $10, $15, $20 scales, these really, really small ones that are designed for jewelry and things like that, they're all really accurate. So just pick up any one of them. I'll drop the one that I'm using right now down in the description, but honestly, none of them work perfectly, meaning waterproof, USB-C, and small enough. I wouldn't use a kitchen scale. I would pick up one of these small guys, just because you want something that you can quickly pull out and put away. Speaking of which, let's drink some tea. So you wanna make sure when you're getting one of these that you get one that has more than 100 gram capacity, and they're typically less than 500 grams. The reason being, if you don't have a separate tea scoop and you want to just put your pot on top to weigh it, most of your pots are gonna be 1 to 200 grams for smaller Gongfu or Japanese style brewing. And so if it maxes out at 100 or even 200 grams, you might not be able to weigh it with your pot on it. So I'd get one that's 300 to 500 grams as the maximum weight threshold. The next is gonna be your all-arounder, the jack of all trades for your teapots that you're gonna be able to use for basically any type of tea except for the really, really, really fine Japanese green teas, 100 milliliter gaiwan. And this could be the cheapest, like $5 to $10 white porcelain gaiwan that you could find, or a really nice wood-fired one like this one from Yuechao. It doesn't really matter. What you need it for is testing. You wanna get it to have something as a baseline to compare other teas to. So for example, if you wanted to test out teas at different steep times, or if you got a clay pot and you wanted to see, well, what does the flavor, how does it actually change with using it in clay versus not? And the 100 milliliters is a really good standard because most tea companies will offer how many grams of tea you should put per 100 when you get into specialty tea. Typically it's gonna be 4 or 5 grams. Sometimes for Japanese teas, for example, it's even lower, like 2.5 or 3, or really, really nice, actually Chinese green teas also do that. There's one exception to that, and these are the Dragon Balls. If you drink a lot of the Dragon Balls or samplers, they do come in typically 6 or 7 grams, so typically it will be a little bit too much for a 100 milliliter gaiwan, but otherwise you should be fine. A tea subscription. And the reason isn't just because the tea tastes good. For most of us, it's because there's learning to be had. It's just a fun endeavor. I hear tea company owners talking about how it's similar to like a scavenger hunt or like a Zelda game when you're going and sourcing tea. And I feel like it's the same thing when you're getting introduced to teas. When a company releases a tea that's never been heard of or never been talked about before. And here's the cool thing. The Western and the Eastern markets, they aren't necessarily aligned. So there may be a tea that's really popular in the West. For example, the Moonlight White, that isn't super popular in China. But the nice thing about the subscription is you get, well, a shotgun effect. You get all of these different types of tea, and sometimes it's teas you're familiar with, and sometimes you're not the most excited about, but a lot of the times you'll get new teas that will get you interested in a new area, a new terroir, a new type of tea or flavor or sensation, because it's something that's outside of your normal comfort zone. For me personally, I always have my white tea subscription because I just think it's good value. And his obsession for trying to create blends that make the tea more than what it's worth, getting an affordable leaf and getting it to taste like a more expensive leaf, for me is interesting. It's cool to see that process. You're never gonna get the best, most premium quality teas in a tea subscription, but when companies do what Paul's trying to do, where you're trying to get more flavor for your dollar, I think it's pretty cool. Alternatively, West China Tea does this like monthly Zoom video chat format talking about the tea, which is something that's really cool, and it just makes sense. Sohan is so good. If you go to West China Tea, he's so good about sharing the tea and having that space and introducing it to people and giving them this education and the starting point for things, which is really, really awesome. For Japanese teas, any green teas or matcha, I would say Neo Tea is gonna be a great place to start. And then if you wanna do herbal teas, Snarky Tea obviously is an awesome choice for that. If you do wanna pick up a Gaiwan that will be your lifetime Gaiwan, like this Yue Chao one, this style of Yue Chao's wood-fired Gaiwans has been my favorite for years. Actually, I have one that I chipped in a video. It's still one of my favorites. I still keep it. I still use it all the time, even with the chip along this edge. Cheers. Next we have a tea pick. This is one that inevitably when you start jumping off the deep end and get into loose tea, you will get to a point where you find compressed tea cakes. And it's one of those weird things where before I had a tea pick, I just didn't drink my tea cakes. It seems so simple. Like, could you just use like a butter knife or a letter opener? You can, but I find that the ones that have really, really flat tips, specifically tea knives that are designed for it, are just gonna give you an easier time in separating the tea and make it feel like you're taking away a barrier. That's kind of what all of these things in this video are talking about, is like the electric kettle. Yeah, you could stovetop kettle it, but that's a barrier that we're taking away. Having your 100 milliliter standard Gaiwan for testing when you get new teas. These things all take away barriers for me, and the tea pick is definitely one that does that for me. It makes it so I can just easily whoosh, pop out, get some tea, and go. They do taste different, by the way. If you've never tasted a loose and a pressed cake of the same tea material, the pressing process does change the flavor. But for me, it's kind of a utility thing and then a completely subjective take. So the first, for the utility, compressed tea takes up so much less space. A 300-gram cake takes up this much space of white tea, and a white tea bag is like this huge bag that I just like having compressed teas. The second is the art. If you see in any of my shorts, I have the art up of some of my white teas that I've drank through the years up on the wall, and it's just because I like the art. I like that there's this artistic expression in tea cakes. It doesn't add any physical value to the tea, but for me it adds like an emotional, a sentimental, this cool other component to the tea's story. Also, one cool thing over the last 3 to 5 years, most of the specialty tea companies have started to press their cakes looser. So really you only need this to get the cake started, and then you can probably actually grab a piece off without breaking any tea leaves, which honestly I really appreciate. If anyone has tea cakes that are 5, 7, 10 years old and you're sitting there and you feel like you're about to stab the middle of your hand with a tea cake, I am very happy that I do not need to worry about stabbing myself with my tea picks anymore. So whether you've been drinking tea for a few weeks or you've been at it for a while, I hope you learned something or at least got a laugh out of this video, but I'm gonna go drink some more of this dancehong.